The Silent Witness, Part 1, The Silent Night. The wind howled a mournful dirge around Thorne Manor, a symphony of rage that perfectly mirrored the tempest brewing inside. 10 years ago, on a night much like this, Eleanor was nothing but a shadow, a phantom in the grand, secluded estate. She was the youngest maid, quiet and unassuming, her presence barely registered by the opulent world she silently served. That night, the storm had chased her into the east wing, where a forgotten chore, a loose curtain tassel, offered a flimsy excuse to linger. But it was the rising voices, sharp and brittle, that held her transfixed. Julian and Vivian Thorne. Their arguments were a common, if hushed, occurrence, but tonight an icy dread prickled Eleanor's skin. She pressed herself against the cold, carved paneling of the hallway, a terrified mouse trapped behind the wainscoting. Through a crack in the half-open study door, Eleanor watched, her breath catching in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Julian Thorne, a man whose charm was as polished as his silver, was no longer charming. His face, usually a mask of geniality, was contorted with a chilling fury. Vivian, beautiful and fragile, backed away from him, her hand pressed to her throat. Eleanor saw the flash of something metallic in Julian's hand, a heavy, ornate letter opener, usually displayed on his desk. Then the world tilted. A sickening thud, a gasp that was abruptly cut short. Vivian slid to the floor, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Eleanor clamped a trembling hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Her stomach churned. She was witnessing a murder. What followed was a meticulous, chilling dance. Julian, without a hint of panic, began to stage the scene. He dropped the letter opener, then carefully picked up a heavy glass decanter from a nearby table, wiping it clean before placing it precariously near Vivian's hand. He smeared a trace of blood onto the cuff of a discarded jacket. Sebastian's jacket, Eleanor realized with a fresh wave of dread. He scattered papers, overturned a chair, creating an illusion of a violent struggle. His gaze swept the room, resting momentarily on Vivian's hand. He bent, his fingers deftly unclasped a unique, intricate locket from around her neck. It was an antique, a gift from Vivian's own mother, one she cherished and rarely took off. Eleanor had noticed it often, a delicate silver filigree with a tiny sapphire. Julian's fingers closed around it, and he tucked it away somewhere within his own clothes, a detail Eleanor's terror-sharpened mind seared into her memory. Sebastian, poor, volatile Sebastian, troubled, impulsive, prone to outbreaks of temper that always left him racked with remorse. He was the perfect, tragic scapegoat. Eleanor didn't wait for the police sirens, didn't dare to. Her legs, weak with fear, carried her away from the horror. She fled the manor that night, a ghost escaping a bloody tomb, taking with her only the searing memory of Vivian's vacant eyes and Julian's cold, calculating malice. The locket, last seen clutched in Julian's hand, was a fragmented yet crucial detail he had overlooked in his meticulous staging. Days later, the news broke. Vivian Thorne tragically murdered. Sebastian, overwhelmed by grief, found at the scene the murder weapon near his hand, his father's accusations ringing in his ears. Under coercion, under the immense weight of his own history and a grief that twisted his mind, he confessed. He was sentenced, his life stolen, leaving Eleanor haunted by her silence, by the truth she buried deep within her own shattered heart. Part 2. The Return of the Unseen. 10 years later, the Thorne estate stood as pristine and imposing as ever, a monument to a grief that was publicly acknowledged but privately festered. Gothic architecture, dark and brooding, cast long shadows even on the clearest days, the gargoyles on its eaves seemingly weeping stone tears. Within its grand, silent walls, an unspoken tension hummed beneath the polished surfaces, a lingering scent of old secrets and forgotten sorrows. Julian Thorne, silver-haired and impeccably tailored, maintained his facade of a grieving patriarch with the practiced ease of a seasoned actor. He was a pillar of the community, a man who had bravely endured an unspeakable tragedy. He moved through his life with an air of dignified sorrow, his eyes betraying nothing but a distant, perhaps weary, melancholy. Sebastian, now in his early 30s, had just been released from prison on parole. A decade behind bars had stripped him bare, leaving him broken and embittered. His eyes, once fiery and impulsive, held a haunted, distant look. He carried the weight of a crime he didn't commit, the ghost of his mother's death and his own coerced confession etched into every line of his gaunt face. He returned to the manor not as a son, but as a reluctant prisoner of his past, relegated to the guest cottage on the property, a symbol of his tenuous freedom. Eleanor, no longer the timid girl who fled in terror, returned too. Her maiden name, Price, was a shield, a new skin. Her girlish innocence had been painstakingly replaced by a quiet, steely resolve that radiated from her poised posture and the unwavering gaze in her hazel eyes. She was in her late 20s, her features matured, her demeanor composed. The haunted silence of her past had forged her into a weapon. Having meticulously planned her return for years, cultivating a new identity and a flawless resume, she applied for the live-in housekeeper position at Thorne Manor. The advertisement had been vague, yet specific enough for her to recognize Julian's precise demands for order. Julian himself conducted her brief interview in his study, the very room where Vivian had died. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, barely glancing up from a sheaf of papers. His questions were curt, dismissive. He asked about experience, references, loyalty. Eleanor answered with practiced ease, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering, yet carefully neutral. She watched him, cataloging every subtle twitch, every dismissive gesture. He never recognized her. To him, she was just another domestic, her face as indistinct as any other who had passed through his employment. "You'll do," he'd grunted, signing a form without meeting her eyes. "The estate requires a firm hand and a quiet presence. Maintain the standards." Eleanor merely inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart pulsed with a triumphant, vengeful rhythm. Her mission had begun. She was no longer a silent witness. She was a meticulously crafted instrument of justice. And Julian Thorne had just welcomed his executioner into his home. Part 3. Unearthing Buried Truths. Eleanor moved through the vast, echoing halls of Thorne Manor like a ghost. Her new uniform, a stark black dress, practical and unobtrusive, allowed her to blend into the background, an unseen observer in the opulent prison. Every dust mot was noted, every creaking floorboard recorded. She observed Julian's subtle tells, the way his jaw tightened when a particular subject was broached, the way he dismissed a servant with a flick of his wrist. She saw Sebastian's deep-seated despair, the way he carried himself, heavy with a grief that had curdled into bitterness. Her campaign began subtly, an insidious whisper in the manor's oppressive silence. Julian's unease. The first whispers of unease began with Vivian. Eleanor knew Julian prided himself on his impeccable memory for details, especially those that cemented his narrative. She began to strategically place objects that subtly invoked Vivian's presence. A delicate porcelain figurine, one Vivian cherished, appeared on Julian's desk, not where he habitually placed it, but exactly where Vivian had kept it in the days before her death. Julian would merely scowl, moving it back to his preferred spot, dismissing it as a lapse in the new housekeeper's memory. Then came the music. Eleanor, as she polished the grand piano in the drawing room, would hum a soft, melancholic melody, a tune Vivian Thorne had favored, one Julian had probably forgotten or deliberately suppressed. The first time, Julian merely paused in the doorway, a furrow in his brow. "Is that necessary, Miss Price?" he'd snapped. Eleanor would feign apology, explaining it was an old melody from her childhood. But the instances accumulated. A specific variety of roses, Vivian's favorite, began to appear in the floral arrangements. A particular brand of jasmine tea, Vivian's morning ritual, found its way into Julian's breakfast tray. He began to sleep poorly, his temper fraying at the edges. He started dismissing long-serving staff for imagined slights, for leaving doors slightly ajar or for misplacing a newspaper. A growing paranoia began to take root, making his eyes dart nervously around the room as if something unseen watched him. Sebastian's hope. Sebastian, relegated to the guest cottage, was a shadow within a shadow. He rarely came to the main house, preferring his self-imposed exile. Eleanor found ways to connect, offering him quiet kindness, a non-judgmental empathy he hadn't experienced in a decade. She'd leave a thermos of hot coffee, brewed exactly to his liking, on his doorstep, or a fresh-baked pastry, a small gesture of care. One rain-swept afternoon, she found him staring out at the stormy gardens, lost in thought. "A difficult day, Mr. Thorne?" she asked softly, placing a cup of chamomile tea beside him. He flinched, startled, then nodded. "Every day is difficult, Miss Price." Eleanor simply sat, quietly dusting a nearby bookshelf. "Sometimes," she ventured, "memory can be a cruel master, isn't it? Twisting things, making us doubt what we truly know." She subtly encouraged him to recall details from that fateful night. "The police reports mentioned a struggle," she murmured casually while bringing him fresh linens. "Was it a long one or very quick?" Sebastian frowned, his brow furrowing. I don't remember much. It's a haze. A fight, yes. Voices. Then, nothing. Just Mother on the floor." Eleanor discovered an old hidden journal of Vivian's that Julian had missed in his initial purge. It was tucked away behind a loose brick in the old library fireplace, a place Vivian must have thought safe. She presented it to Sebastian, saying, "I found this while cleaning, Mr. Thorne. It seemed private. Perhaps it belongs to you." Sebastian, hesitant at first, eventually began to read. The journal, written in Vivian's elegant script, wasn't a confession, but a poignant, chilling testament to her growing fear of Julian. Snippets like, "Julian's temper is becoming unbearable. I fear him. He spoke of taking everything from me, of making me regret defying him," and veiled threats he'd made slowly chipped away at Sebastian's ingrained narrative of guilt. A seed of doubt, carefully planted, began to sprout. The locket. Eleanor's search for the locket was methodical, relentless. She remembered its intricate filigree, the tiny sapphire. She knew it held a key. She dusted, she polished, she probed. Every drawer, every cabinet, every forgotten nook and cranny in Julian's study, the site of the murder, was meticulously examined. She spent weeks searching, her fingers tracing the patterns in the ornate woodwork. Finally, her reward came. Behind a carved book panel on the far wall of Julian's study, a panel she knew was rarely disturbed, her fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible catch. It sprang open, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay the locket. It was exactly as she remembered, shimmering silver with the sapphire gleaming faintly. Her heart pounded as she unclasped it. Inside, opposite a miniature photo of Vivian, was a tiny, almost invisible inscription etched with a jeweler's precision. My dearest V, until we are free, JT. It wasn't a loving sentiment from Julian. Eleanor knew that JT was Julian, but the inscription was not for Vivian. It was a secret love token, a piece of someone else's affection for Vivian, a testament to a betrayal Julian Thorne could never forgive, and a motive for murder that went beyond simple rage. It proved malicious intent, a history of grievance meticulously hidden. Julian wore it after the murder, a twisted trophy. Detective Harding's re-entry. Simultaneously, Eleanor initiated the anonymous tip. Using a burner phone and a public Wi-Fi signal, she sent a brief cryptic email to Detective Harding, the original investigator. Check police report 7B, page 3, line 12. The window latch was not broken from the outside as reported, it was forced from within. This was a detail only an eyewitness, someone hidden inside the room, would know. Harding, a seasoned detective now with more gray at his temples, had always harbored a nagging doubt about Sebastian's quick conviction. The case had felt too tidy, Sebastian's confession suspiciously swift. The anonymous tip, so specific, so damning, piqued his interest. He discreetly pulled the old file, re-examining the crime scene photos, the forensic reports. The mention of the window latch, an inconsistency he had dismissed at the time as a minor detail, now screamed at him. He began discreetly re-examining the case, re-interviewing cold witnesses, noting Julian's increasing erratic behavior. Julian's paranoia, now visible even to outsiders, made him lash out, publicly, at figures of authority, including local police. This drew Harding's attention more directly to the estate. He began making unannounced visits, first under the guise of follow-up questions, then more directly. He saw the subtle changes in Julian, the way Eleanor, the new housekeeper, moved with remarkable quiet efficiency. The threads were beginning to intertwine. Part 4. The Unveiling. The storm returned on the night of the unveiling. Rain lashed against the manor's Gothic windows, and thunder cracked like a firing gun, mirroring the tempest brewing inside the house. Eleanor, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs, knew this was the night. She had gathered all her evidence. Vivian's journal, its pages filled with a mother's fear. The locket, small but mighty with its betraying inscription. And her own harrowing first-hand account held silently for a decade. She found Julian in his study, as she knew she would. He was nursing a brandy, the lamplight casting his face in a harsh, isolating glow. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, his composure finally beginning to crack under the relentless pressure of Eleanor's subtle provocations and Harding's renewed scrutiny. Eleanor closed the study door softly behind her, the click echoing in the tense silence. Julian looked up, annoyed. "What is it, Miss Price? Can't you see I'm busy?" "It's Eleanor, Mr. Thorne," she corrected, her voice clear and steady, devoid of her usual deference. "Eleanor Vance, though you knew me as Eleanor Price for a time. 10 years ago, you knew me as Eleanor Smith, the maid." Julian blinked, a flicker of confusion, then recognition, cold and terrifying, dawned in his eyes. His hand tightened around his glass. "What in God's name are you talking about?" he hissed, his smooth façade beginning to crumble. Eleanor stepped further into the room, her hand outstretched. In it, nestled on a dark velvet cloth, lay the silver locket. "This," she said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of long-suppressed truth, "belonged to Vivian. You took it from her neck that night, the night you murdered her." Julian's face went pale, then purple with rage. "You're mad! Get out of my house!" He lunged for her, but Eleanor stepped back, out of reach. "No," she said, her conviction hardening with every word. She laid the locket on his desk next to a worn leather-bound journal. This is Vivian's journal. She wrote about her fear of you, her fear of what you would do when she finally left you. She opened the locket, pointing to the tiny, almost invisible inscription. And this, she continued, was not put there by Vivian. This was a secret, Julian, a secret you found, a motive. Julian stared at the locket, his eyes widening in horror as he recognized the inscription, a detail he thought buried forever. His polished façade shattered entirely. You saw, he breathed, the words barely a whisper. His denial dissolved into pure animalistic fury. You saw, you little wretch, and you ran. You left him to rot, and now you come back to destroy me? His rage erupted. He overturned his desk chair, sending it crashing to the floor. You won't silence me, Eleanor cried. But Julian was already across the room, his eyes wild, his hands reaching for her throat. I'll do to you what I should have done that night. Just as his fingers brushed her neck, the study door burst open. Sebastian stood there, his face ashen, having been drawn by the shouting, by the familiar, chilling sound of his father's unrestrained fury. He'd been in the main house, finally piecing together Eleanor's subtle clues. The journal, the questions, the growing dread in his own heart. He saw Julian, mid-attack, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of monstrous hate, aimed at the woman who had brought him solace. He saw Eleanor, terrified but resolute. The image solidified the fragmented memories, the doubts, the insidious truth he had buried for a decade. His father, the grieving patriarch, was a cold-blooded murderer. Father! Sebastian's voice was a raw, guttural cry, filled with anguish and betrayal. Julian flinched, turning for a split second, his rage momentarily diverted. He saw Sebastian's face etched with horror and knew his carefully constructed lie was over. He snatched the locket from the desk, his intention clear, to crush it, to destroy the last piece of hard evidence. But before he could, another force burst into the room. Detective Harding, acting on a final, urgent, anonymous call from Eleanor, a short, breathless message about the locket and Julian's unraveling, and his own deepening suspicions, lunged forward. He slammed into Julian, knocking the locket from his grasp. It skittered across the polished floor, stopping at Sebastian's feet. Cornered, exposed, Julian dropped to his knees, his hands thrown up in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. The fight drained from him, replaced by a torrent of panicked, incoherent words. She deserved it. She betrayed me. She was going to take everything. He would have believed her, not me, my son, my life. His desperate, panicked confession spilled forth, a cacophony of fear and resentment, finally shattering the silence he had so meticulously crafted. Part 5. Repercussions and Rebirth. The oppressive weight that had hung over Thorne Manor for a decade lifted with Julian's apprehension, replaced by a storm of public outrage and disbelief. His meticulously crafted reputation, the image of the grieving widower, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The shocking truth of Vivian's cold-blooded murder and Sebastian's wrongful imprisonment sent ripples of horror and condemnation through the affluent community Julian had so carefully cultivated. News vans converged on the estate, cameras flashing, microphones thrust at bewildered neighbors. Julian Thorne, his face pale and haggard, was led away in handcuffs, his once pristine suits rumpled, and his arrogance replaced by a hollow-eyed terror. Sebastian stood in the grand foyer, watching his father being taken away, a complex mix of emotions warring within him. Relief, sharp and exhilarating, cut through the decade of despair. But it was a bitter victory. The truth, finally revealed, provided no balm for a decade stolen. for the loss of his mother twice over, once to death, once to his father's betrayal. He was formally exonerated within weeks, a legal process that felt hollow after so much life had been irrevocably lost. He was free, yes, but the scars ran deep, the phantom shackles still chafed. Detective Harding, his face etched with a profound sense of regret, approached Sebastian in the following days. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice hoarse with genuine remorse, "there are no words. My office, I failed you. For that, I am truly sorry." He extended his hand, and Sebastian, after a long moment, accepted it. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it spoke volumes of the systemic failures, the hurried judgments, and the power of a convincing lie. Eleanor, no longer a silent witness, gave a comprehensive, harrowing testimony to the detectives, then later in court. Her voice, once a quiet murmur, now resonated with years of suppressed truth. She recounted every detail of that stormy night, her words painting a vivid, undeniable picture of Julian's calculated brutality. Her testimony, clear and unwavering, combined with Vivian's journal, the locket, and Sebastian's own corroborating memories, sealed Julian's fate. It was the crushing weight of her eyewitness account, the voice finally given to a buried trauma, that truly convicted him. She spoke of her fear, her guilt, her decade-long torment, and her unyielding resolve to see justice served. Her silence had been a burden. Her voice now was a powerful force for truth. Part 6. A New Horizon. The trial was swift and brutal. Julian Thorne, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his meticulously crafted illusion of respectability, was convicted of Vivian's murder and Sebastian's wrongful imprisonment. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, his opulent prison now exchanged for a cold steel cage, a fitting end for a man who had built his life on deceit and manipulation. The name Thorne, once synonymous with prestige, became a whispered epithet, a cautionary tale of hidden depravity. Sebastian, though legally free, faced the arduous task of rebuilding a life irrevocably scarred. The manor, once his childhood home, now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to deception and sorrow. He couldn't stay there, not yet. The ghosts were too loud, the memories too painful. He sold the estate, severing the last tangible link to his past, a necessary act of liberation. He retreated from the public eye, seeking solace in quiet anonymity, beginning a slow, painstaking journey of healing and rediscovery. The weight of a lost decade would forever be a part of him, but the crushing burden of false guilt had finally been lifted. Eleanor, having ensured justice for Vivian and Sebastian, found her own agency, a profound sense of inner peace. The silence that had once defined her had been shattered, replaced by the resonant power of her own voice. She left the Thorne estate, not as a maid whose duty was done, but as a survivor, a harbinger of truth who had reclaimed her own narrative. She didn't seek fame or reward, only the quiet satisfaction of having righted a terrible wrong. She purchased a small cottage by the sea, far from the shadows of grand estates and the echoing lies of the past. The rhythmic crash of the waves offered a new, soothing cadence, a stark contrast to the storm that had once raged within her. She started a new life, free from the suffocating weight of silence, free to define herself on her own terms. The path to healing was long for Sebastian, fraught with the challenges of reclaiming a lost identity and forging a new future. But Eleanor's courageous act, her unwavering pursuit of justice, had offered him and herself a profound chance at an authentic future, one built not on denial, but on the raw, undeniable truth. The silent witness had spoken, and in doing so, had finally set them both free.